Hello, fellow fiends. It's an absolute pleasure to have been invited once again by Sadie, Mother Horror herself, to do a reading for this series, this annual series celebrating horror. And I thought I would read from my latest book, which is The Fall, which is the sequel to The Gulp, which came out last year. The Gulp was 5 stories, intertwined, interconnected novellas that tell a variety of different stories all about the same place, Culpeper, which is a strange isolated harbour town on the coast of Australia, where weird things happen and things get continually weirder. Those 5 stories told something of a bigger story, and then this year The Fall came out, 5 more stories, 5 more novellas set in and around Culpeper. And these 5 stories interconnect and tell more of the story of Culpeper. So across 10 stories, we have something of a mosaic novel. All the stories stand alone, but they all have shared locations, shared characters, situation like that. I'm going to read an excerpt today from the 4th story. God, I don't even know my own book. 4th story in The Fall, which is called Excursion Troop, and it's the story of a group of venture scouts who are doing their last big excursion. They're venture scouts from Endon. Culpeper is a small town on the coast. Endon to the north, Moncton to the south. Most people drive from Endon straight to Moncton, and if they're smart, they don't turn off and go to Culpeper. Locals call it the Gulp because the place has a habit of swallowing people. And this is a venture scout troop from Endon, and they're in the bush near Endon, and they're enjoying one last excursion with their scoutmaster. And where this story picks up is with one of the characters, Chili. She's a teenage girl venture scout. This is on their first night camping in the bush during this excursion, when their scout leader and one of the others ate some wild mushrooms that they found. And this is a horror collection, so I mean, you know what's going to happen to people that eat mushrooms that they find in the bush, right? So this excerpt picks up in the night after they had the mushrooms for dinner. After 2 of them had the mushrooms for dinner. The rest of the troop didn't. Smart. At first, Chili thought she was dreaming. Then, for a moment after realising she was awake, she thought she'd gone blind. It was absolutely pitch dark under the trees, but the noises of pain and distress were close by, and then a couple of light flares proved she hadn't lost her sight. She fumbled for her own headlamp, clicked it on, flooding the tight swag with white light. She unzipped and belly crawled forwards to see the other lights were being worn by Cam and Mohinder. "Darren?" Mohinder said, crouching near the scout leader's swag. "You okay?" Darren's noises were disturbing. Chili was reminded of the time her father had suffered a debilitating bout of gastro after eating some prawns that were past their best. Willow and Otis emerged, also wearing their headlamps, the beams crisscrossing in the night, painting the trunks of the gum trees in sweeping patterns. "What's happening?" Otis asked. "Darren?" Mohinder pressed. Darren's sounds of distress were punctuated with wild bursts of giggling, the kind where someone tried desperately not to laugh, but the harder they tried, the more the giggles bubbled up. It sounded manic. "Sonia?" Cam asked, turning to look at her swag. She was the only one not present. "Darren, I'm going to open your swag. That okay?" Mohinder said. "Hey, Sonia." Cam crouched near her swag. "Are you panting?" Chili frowned. Panting? She went to stand by Cam as he reached down and unzipped Sonia's swag. As the front flapped down, a sound burst out. At first, Chili thought it was a scream of terror, but quickly realised it was rage as Sonia surged out and flattened Cam. He slammed onto his back and Sonia landed with her knees on his hips. She laughed maniacally. "The fuck?" Cam managed. Chili saw the raw animal fury in Sonia's eyes despite the laughter. The combination was chilling. Then Sonia dropped forward and clamped her teeth hard across Cam's throat. His shout became a gargled howl of pain as Sonia sat back up, worrying her head side to side like a dog. Blood gouted up, sprayed her chest and face. A lump of Cam's flesh gripped in her teeth. Cam bucked underneath her, his eyes rolling madly, the white showing all around. He looked as though he was screaming, but no sound came, just blood and scarlet bubbles. Sonia chewed, her eyes flicking wildly from one scalp to the next as Cam's blood pooled across the dry ground, his movements swiftly weakening. Mohinder and Otis staggered back from Darren's swag. It bulged and flexed as the man inside thrashed around. His pained groans and laughter turned to grunts of effort. Then the swag split along one side and Darren stood, eyes wild, lips peeled back from his teeth in a feral snarl. "Fucking run!" Chili yelled. The rest of the troop didn't need telling twice. Chili, Willow, Mohinder and Otis bolted into the darkness. The last thing Chili saw was Sonia ducking down for another bite of Cameron's throat, and Darren arching his back, arms out to either side as he turned and fell on Cam as well. "Lights out," Otis said. "Fuck's sake, what's happening?" They all reached up as they ran, snapped their lights off, and suddenly found themselves in pitch darkness. Chili quickly clicked hers back on. "We need one light or we'll brain ourselves or break our fucking necks." "They can follow us easily if they see it," Mohinder said. "Let's just try to get a head start," Chili said. "They're both busy with Cam right now." "What happened to them?" Willow asked. No one answered her as they pushed their way deeper into the trees. After several minutes, Mohinder pulled at Chili's arm. "Let's stop a minute, turn the light off and let's rest. Figure out what to do." A large fallen gum lay off to one side, surrounded by thick bracken and smaller trees. "There," Chili pointed. The group clambered over and sank down into the shelter on the other side of the huge trunk. Chili turned off her headlamp and darkness fell over them, like someone had closed them in a box. They sat in silence, but for their panting breaths for several moments. "She killed him," Otis said at last. "Did you see? She tore his fucking throat out." "And then she started eating him," Mohinder said. Otis barked a laugh that was almost a sob. "They always were all over each other. Natural progression, right?" "Jesus, Otis," Willow muttered. Chili realised she was shaking like she was freezing, but sweat poured down her back in the hot night. Her hair was stuck to her forehead with it. They all wore only shorts and t-shirts. She had bare feet and assumed the other three also had no shoes, and nothing else but a headlamp. Having run in a wild panic for several minutes, she had no idea where the hell they were. She couldn't even recall what direction they'd gone from the camp. She opened her mouth to share these insights, but froze when Darren's animal howl rang through the bush, distant, muted, but somehow still so threatening. "We ran far enough, didn't we? We couldn't hear him from the camp," Willow said. Chili frowned, the expression lost on the others in the near-pitch dark. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he sounds closer to us than the camp should be." "He's following us," Otis said. "I think so." "Hunting us?" Chili asked. "I expect so." "I've got a knife," Otis said. "A Swiss Army knife. It stays in the pocket of my shorts even when I'm sleeping. Out here, that is, not at home. I'm not a psycho." "Anyone got anything else?" Chili asked. It quickly became apparent that between the four of them, there were 4 LED headlamps, 1 Swiss Army knife, and nothing else. Willow's panting became a little hitch, and Chili realised the other girl was crying. "It's okay," Mohinder said, moving in the darkness. His voice sounded tight with tears too. There was shuffling, and Chili imagined Mohinder putting an arm around Willow's shoulders. The girl was clearly upset if she allowed that. Willow didn't do the touchy-feely stuff much. Neither did Chili, for that matter, unless it was someone she really wanted to touch her. That didn't apply to anyone here, though. "Those fucking mushrooms," Chili said. "Right? It has to be." "The mushrooms were fine," Otis said. "And I don't say that because I found them and now I'm guilty. Those were safe mushrooms, definitely. Saffron caps. About that other stuff, the white threads all through it. Darren was so dismissive about that, but I reckon he should have been more concerned. The way he started lecturing, the expert fucking mycologist," Mohinder said. "Just because it's a pet subject doesn't mean he knows everything," Chili said softly. "I mean, it's a fairly easy mistake to make, isn't it?" Otis grunted, half annoyed, half conceding the point. "Maybe. Regardless, here we are. What the fuck do we do now? Cam's dead. Actually fucking dead." "And Sonia and Darren are total psychos," Mohinder said. "We just have to get away, right? I wish one of us still had a compass or something." "I'd literally kill for a phone," Chili said. "Just thinking about all our phones locked in the safe at the scout hall makes me furious." Willow's voice had hardened, using anger to suppress fear, Chili guessed. "Only Darren has one. Turned off, but carried in case of emergencies," Otis said, in a surprisingly good parody of Darren's voice. Chili realised that might be an option. Could we circle back to the camp and find it, grab it, sneak away, then call for help? "A few problems with that," Otis said. "One is we don't know where Darren has it. Even if we found it, does it have a passcode or a fingerprint lock? Even if we could get an emergency call out, is there any signal all the way out here? And besides all that," Willow said quietly, "does anyone have any idea where the camp is? Like, what direction?" Chili's fears from before were confirmed by the general sounds of dismay. "We had to run for our lives," she said. "Let's not beat ourselves up about not orienteering properly." "I think we need to just keep moving," Mohinder said. "Find our way out of the bush. We can't know what direction yet, but when the sun comes up, we'll know which way is east." And what do we do until sunrise? Hide out, I guess. I'm wearing my watch. It's nearly 3 a.m. Sunrise isn't that far off. We sit tight and wait for dawn. And then where? Willow asked. If we walk away from the sun, that'll be heading due west. The Endon to Monkton road runs that way. If we keep heading west, we'll find it. The one with the turn off for Culpeper, Chili asked. Yeah, creepy fucking road that is. For sure, but once we find it, we turn north and we'll be back in Endon eventually. Maybe even thumb a ride or something, flag someone down, ask for help or a phone. Chili swallowed, but realised her trembling had eased a little. Okay, that's a plan of sorts. Do you think it'll work? Any better ideas? Otis asked. She opened her mouth to admit she didn't have any, but was interrupted again by Darren's feral, ululating howl, this time loud and close and piercing. He's right near us, Willow hissed. Little pigs, Darren's voice was sing-song and close enough to make the hair stand up along Chili's arms. I'll find you and eat you. There was a sudden crashing and Chili felt a rain of bark and leaves tickle across her neck as something heavy and hot and bad-smelling came over the fallen trunk right behind her. Fucking run! She screamed, and without waiting for the others, she bolted. Shouts and yelps erupted behind her. Moinda howled in pain and yelled, She fucking bit me! It's Sonia too! That was Willow, high-pitched and panicked. Something grabbed at Chili's arm and she cried out, began to twist away when Otis said close to her ear, It's me, stay together. His hand slid down her arm and his fingers intertwined with hers. She returned the grip and they blundered between the trees. A slight thinning of the canopy, coupled with splits in the cloud, allowed a smear of weak moonlight through. Chili saw Otis's face, black and white like an old film negative in the strange night. His eyes were wide, teeth clenched. There. He pointed and she followed his finger to see a cluster of rocks tumbled down centuries, even millennia past, but they rose in a kind of lumpy set of peaks and troughs, the large gaps between them negative spaces of empty shadows. Up high and hide? Chili asked. Yeah, gain some advantage. If this moonlight persists, we'll see anyone coming, maybe. Get her off of me! Mahinder's voice was strident and high with pain and panic, but it sounded a fair way back. Fuck you! That was Willow again. Rage threaded throughout her shout. A sharp thwack followed it and the sound of splintering wood. A deep bellow of pain, then a high scream, more animal than human. Was that last sound from Sonia? She'd been chillingly silent throughout the entire episode until then, Chili realised. They reached the rocks and pushed and hauled each other up and over the rounded boulders, scratchy with dried patches of lichen. The outcrop was bigger than it first seemed, and they got a good 10 metres above the forest floor before backing into a deep wedge formed where one enormous boulder had split down the middle. The V of the small chasm had collected detritus over the years and had a flattened floor about a metre wide, but that low aspect was drenched in inky shadow. They hunkered down into it, still clasping each other's hands tightly. The slick sweat across Chili's palm was somehow reassuring. She used the other arm to wipe sweat from her brow, concentrated on steadying her breathing. Otis's hand trembled slightly. Or was that her? Most likely it was both of them. How did they find us so easily? Otis said, barely above a whisper. In the close confines, in the still of the night, she heard him clearly enough. I don't know. And she didn't like that she didn't know, because Otis raised a good point. Look. Mahinda and Willow were hurrying through the bush some 50 metres away from them, passing right by their hiding place. Moinda held his left arm tight to his chest, pressing against it with his right. Willow had her arm around his back, helping him along. In the black and white shadows of weak moonlight, it was hard to see much, but Mahinda's shirt, arms, even his face seemed to be covered in dark stains. Blood looks black at night, Chili thought. And things don't get a lot better for these guys for a while yet, if at all. Who survives? Who knows? They're near the Gulp, so anything can happen. That was Excursion Troop, or an excerpt from Excursion Troop from The Fall, the second Tales of the Gulp, sequel to The Gulp. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Sadie, for inviting me along. Celebrate horror. Horror is healthy. All the best, everyone. Take care now. Cheers.